Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is Protest and Promise. We actually started the series calling it Protest and Unrest, but things have calmed down quite a bit, and now there are a lot of promises being made. So we're going to focus on the promise. We're living through a seismic shift of profound nature, and it's unprecedented. But what happens next will have enormous impact on especially our guests today, because they are young, starting their lives, and they're all deeply committed to change. So I'm delighted to welcome Alondra, Josh, Des, Margarita, Christian, Camarie, and Alexis. Thank you all for being part of this today. And we have to actually offer some congratulations. Margarita, congratulations on graduating from high school. So let's, yay! We're also joined by the rest of you are college students. So I'm just going to kind of begin by going around the room a little bit and getting a very brief introduction. Alondra, what is your area of interest and where are you going to school?
So currently, I'm about to be an alumni this coming Saturday from UC Irvine. I'm going to get my BA in Urban Studies and Political Science. My point of or focus of study is gentrification and the school-to-prison pipeline in communities of color.
Interesting. Okay. Josh?
Hello, everyone. I am a rising senior at LMU. I'm an entrepreneurship major, and I have a minor in women's and gender studies.
That's fascinating. I mean, just right off the bat, that's just both of you so far. I mean, you can see why everyone is on this panel today. That's fascinating. Des?
Hi, my name is Des. I also attend Loyola Marymount University. I'll be a rising junior studying finance, and I'm really interested in affordable housing and using business as a force for good.
Very cool. Margarita, I already called you out a little bit here, but what are your thoughts and plans for what's happening now?
I'm graduating high school today. I'm going to UCLA I want to study history and hopefully become a teacher one day to be able to give back to my community.
Ah, that's great. Christian.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christian Jackson. I'm a rising junior at Loyola Marymount, just like Des and Josh. I'll be graduating with 2 degrees in entrepreneurship and applied information management systems. Des didn't actually mention this, but we're the co-presidents of a club named Brothers of Consciousness on campus, which is really to promote Black leadership at LMU. And then for my personal interests, I'm interested a lot in venture capital and then socially conscious private equity.
I was not nearly as dedicated as all of you are when I was your age. Camarie.
Hello, I attend Texas Southern University, a historically Black college. I major in film, but I am a staunch advocate for reparations. So I'm considering a career in policy, public policy, for American descendants of slavery.
Wow, okay. Alexis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis, and I'm a rising senior from Loyola Marymount University. I'm majoring in both sociology and psychology, and I'm interested in understanding the mechanisms of race, gender, and class, and how that affects how we interact with each other.
Amazing. You're all amazing, I have to say that. You're all deeply invested in social causes and in change, and you've now been witness to historic events that have taken place, not just here in Los Angeles, but around the world. How are you feeling about what you're witnessing, and how are you feeling about what is taking place? Is it intriguing? Is it scary? Is it past due? What are your thoughts? Camarie, I'm going to start with you.
The protests, they're definitely past due. The frustration has been here, especially in LA. This is nothing that we haven't seen already. Considering the 1965 Watts riots and the 92 LA riots with Rodney King. I think the frustration really just attest to like a bigger issue going on besides, in addition to police brutality. There's like a bigger cry for help from Black Americans in Los Angeles who have historically and presently been ignored.
Do you think they're being heard now?
I don't think so. And I don't think people, the government, politicians really feel like they have to listen to them because we are a bottom caste in America.
Okay. So anyone else feel the same way, that, perhaps despite the drama of what's happening, that maybe the words are not being heard? Des?
Yeah, I can definitely agree with everything that she stated. I think it's almost apparent in the way that these protests are being policed and handled that our voices still aren't being heard. I think for me, it's been knowing that this is past due, but also it's kind of sad that it has to happen during like a quarantine and a pandemic, and that it takes all these different things piled up in order to see the slight changes that we have seen already.
Right. How about you, Christian? What do you think?
I'm pretty much on the same page as them both. I think in a lot of ways, this country has just been building up to this moment. This has been a fight for liberation for Black people in this country for over 400 years. You have Juneteenth coming up pretty soon. That celebrates, when they rode into Texas and finally announced that the Emancipation Proclamation had been made. But they still didn't really let the slaves really be free. You had a bunch of violence going on against them, and then you have the civil rights back in the 60s, and that's a fight to just let us walk around the streets, eat at the same restaurants, so on and so forth. And now the process is, hey, we don't be treated equally within the social justice system. And even that's causing issues, and that's hard to have discussions about for some reason. But I gotta agree. I think in a lot of ways, the voices aren't being completely heard. We're seeing some action now, but not the entire, amount that needs to be done. But hopefully in these next coming weeks, because I think we have momentum right now, we can start seeing these changes being implemented.
That's kind of what I was asking, because, there are a lot of promises going on right now, or people are sort of posturing themselves to hopefully enact change. But how do you feel about the promises? How do you feel about the promises, Josh? What do you think? Are they enough? Do you have faith it's actually going to shift? I mean, obviously we're sensing there's doubt. Do you have the same doubt, or are you feeling a little bit better?
I definitely am filled with doubt because we've been continually let down. Like, police departments always say, oh, we're going to reform, we're going to stop doing this. But then the data just continues to show year after year, still killing unarmed citizens. So I would say I really want to see, no more band-aid solutions. I want the whole thing torn down and then fixed from the ground up. So I feel the promises are let down in the sense if it's like, oh, we're going to, make sure we try a little bit harder to do more. Instead, I want to actually be concrete proof, defunding, better allocation, and, people holding the police accountable, not just the police holding themselves accountable.
Interesting. Alondra, what do you think?
It's kind of hard to be a bit optimistic. In the way I kind of study it, the politicians just say what the people want to hear so that they can get reelected. And it's also very hard to keep, because there is a lot of bureaucracy to keep people accountable. I took a class that kind of broke down, for example, the Department of Child Services. And so for something to be done, it's really hard. And then, like I mentioned in the other interview, why did it take so long? If this was something that the politicians were really interested in, really did care about social justice, then why did it take so long to make an office, like the mayor said about I was diversity or something like that. But I don't know, kind of pessimistic on that side.
Alexis, are you pessimistic too?
Yes, I would say yes. And I feel like there are moments where it just seems so ingenuine, like people are saying what the people want to hear. and not a lot of action and reform is being made. Like other people were saying, it just seems like a band-aid solution, and we're not really taking the time to restructure a system that was founded on the basis of racism. um, and I feel like there's just this, from personal experience, there's just like this numbness and frustration from just this continuous fight that we have to battle against, because our voices aren't really heard, and we've tried so many other routes to have our voice heard, but um, it's not really as effective as we want it to be, or change is not as effective.
Margarita, are you feeling the same? I mean, I've just kind of gone through everyone now, and you obviously have a lot of deep passions and care a lot. So how are you feeling?
Yeah, I agree with all of you guys. Like, it's like people say like, oh, change is gonna happen and it's gonna be different and there's gonna be no more there's no need for protesting, but it's like you've been saying this for years and there's been no actual change. You're just saying empty promises, but where's the actual action? And then I don't know, I feel like you want to have hope, but in times like this, you have to just keep fighting and listening to people and actually do the best that you can to educate yourself and be able to help each other, because that's all we have right now. It's just us.
Okay, I'm going to empower all of you right now. So, and this is one of those straw polls. I'm going to raise your hand if you feel you have solid or even just valid good ideas to make this work. Josh mentioned sort of deconstructing everything and starting all over again, but how many of you feel like you have ideas? Okay, Camarie, right there.
Well, I am a strong proponent of reparations. I'm big on put your money where your mouth is. If you care enough about Black Americans, then pay us what we are owed. The original sin American has caused is chattel slavery. We should all know this by now, but we tend to stray away from having that conversation. And another thing I wanted to say, during this pandemic, imagine what type of frustration these people had to have had for them to go out and put themselves at risk to get sick. 40 million Americans lost their jobs, you know? So I think it's bigger than what we're even talking about, like, here still. Another thing I wanted to say is, yes, we need police reform, but it was white plunder that allowed that white police officer to keep his knee on that man's neck. It's the system in America that we live in that gave that officer so much comfort and confidence to do what he did, because he knew he would get away with it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it's very profound. Alexis?
I would just say, based on what she said, that I completely agree in investing in our community. I feel like if you begin to invest in the people within the community, then you won't have to resort to like extraneous signs like of violence to, control different situations. If you invest in the education, if you invest in community upliftment, then money is allocated towards them, and they wouldn't have to, result to increased amount of crime.
Do we think this is, oh, yes, absolutely, Alondra.
I wanted to add on to what Alexis was saying. There's, for example, if we look at schools, they're severely underfunded in South Central area and a lot of low-income areas. And instead, there's also food deserts in our areas. There's more liquor stores and actual like healthier alternatives, healthier stores. Of course, trying to stay away from the gentrification does come with improving the community. But if also we empower the community, we can also take that stand and unite better than compared to how the system is right now, where it's not that easy to come together and learn about all these inequalities. Because I didn't learn about these things until I went to college, yet it was something that was happening in my community. So I think another way would just be the empowerment through education.
Okay, she brings up a good point. How old were you when you realized that this was not the way it should be, that it should be different? Des, do you remember how old you were?
Yeah, I think the most profound and I think disheartening experience where I knew like this wasn't right was definitely when I was about 13 with the Trayvon Martin case. I think at that time, I think I was even younger, that I could see myself in his shoes, and I could see that this wasn't going to change. I could feel that we weren't being heard, and it was a bit heartbreaking almost. I think that in school, especially in elementary school, we think that the country is equal, and I think that that was one of the most impactful ways where I saw that this country wasn't built to support me.
Trayvon Martin was one of those moments in time, and obviously, Des, you said how much that affected you. What did you hope would happen? Were you young enough or old enough, excuse me, to really feel like some change would take place? And why did that affect you so much? And did anything change in your world because of it?
So for me, I think I was old enough to even stay up talking with my parents and watching the news. It became kind of a spectacle for the whole country, I think, and especially for I think black men and black people who are around the same age. It was very much an instance where I felt that the justice system failed. I thought at the very least there would have been a conviction, especially following a standoff with the police. I felt like all that got brushed aside. Um, so I really was uh, in a rut, like apathetic about any change that could happen, even following protests. I know Trayvon Martin's a big one, but even during Ferguson, um, waiting for more action by the justice system, by police, um, by the country in general. And I think it even stung a bit more because we had a black president. Um, and it felt like that, we can make progress in one area, but it's still very apparent that the system isn't working fairly, equitably, or equally. So I think it was a point where I wish more could have happened, and it was even more of a slap in the face because we had um, the leader of the free world being a black person, and it's still not being enough to have actionable change that I could see impact me.
And did it impact any of the rest of you? Was it something that was, raise your hand. Oh, okay. Christian?
I'll go ahead and piggyback off that point because I think I was definitely old enough to understand what was going on, but I was also young and naive enough to think that there was no way he'd be acquitted. Like, this is a crime. He's obviously in the wrong. But no way he's not going to be convicted of this. But he was acquitted. And we saw what happened in Florida and around the country afterwards. And then we kept seeing Ferguson. We saw a man get snuffed out by the police in New York just a couple years later. And growing up, these are very developmental years for a lot of Black teenagers around the country. And this is the world that we've developed up into. So thankfully, I think what we're seeing is we are now people who are not entirely disheartened. We may feel, pessimistic, but also hasn't taken away our drive and our inherent need and fight to make things right in this country.
I saw another hand up. It was impacted by that case. Cam, Alexis?
Yes. Going off of what Christian said, understanding the developmental years of understanding the case and how that affected Black women and children and the whole Black community, I feel like being a sociology major, you're able to understand like the social mechanisms and how we as Black people were socialized to like fear the police. Um, and how that affected the way in which we navigate the world and interact with different people. I know from personal experience that we had to sit down and have a conversation with like, what do you do when you have when you interact with the police or have someone that perceives you in a threatening manner. And that affects the way you see yourself and the way you navigate the world. So, like I said before, there's these many traumas that you experience throughout your life that you're not able to articulate have an effect on you. But with everything going on, all of those feelings and emotions just come out.
Camarie?
Most definitely. I believe I was 15 when Trayvon Martin was killed. I was a freshman in high school. I'm from South Central Los Angeles, and I remember feeling very scared. And even still now, thinking about it, I forget how scary it was. I remember at the time everyone was wearing black hoodies to kind of represent and pay tribute to Trayvon. And I have black brothers. I have a black father. It really made me fear for their safety. And then at the same time, it really also made me very angry and kind of created like a racial bias within me towards white men, or I'm not sure if Zimmerman was Hispanic, but it really angered me, and it really angers me again today thinking about it. That man is able to, be free today in Florida, sitting on his couch in quarantine, and Trayvon Martin is dead, and a family lost their son. So that's how I feel about it. Even now today, thinking about it, it really puts me like an uneasy space.
How many of you were given the talk? Des, you were given the talk. I am embarrassed and actually ashamed that that exists. But Des, what was your experience with it?
Honestly, the whole Trayvon Martin case kind of spurred that talk for me. I think around that time, my parents actually sat me down and told me about our country in a different way. And I think, again, when I got my license, I was a senior in high school. Definitely another talk about, even in these highly tense moments on both sides during a traffic stop, to remember to keep your cool, so that you don't intimidate a police officer, a person with a gun, even if you're unarmed, because for whatever reason, my skin tone is perceived like a weapon. So it was definitely mind like enlightening and and eye opening when I had this talk both times. And I think it's unfortunately something that most Black people, if not all Black people in America, have to have.
Josh, did I see your hand too?
Yeah, I did raise my hand. Des, to that point, we kind of live in this society where police officers who are supposed to be trained professionals can be irrational, but us unarmed civilians have to be cool, calm, and collected at all times during it. So I've had the talk multiple times. Whenever another killing, you know, a brutal murder is shown on the news like this, my parents sit me down and say, "Hey, this is what they did wrong right here. This is what they did." I keep telling them, but wasn't cause for them dying. And specifically with the case of Breonna Taylor, what if you were just sleeping and you did nothing wrong? Nothing. And that's why the Trayvon Martin case and many others made me so jaded and so angry, like this ball in my stomach. Because what's the point of body cams if police officers can turn them off or if they're not required for every police officer? Is that supposed to make me feel safe? Or, in the case of George Floyd, when you see a crowd of people watching and they're still doing this stuff, knowing the justice system is going to get them off. And it's like, it's sad, really sad.
Okay. Wow. All right, you guys. All I can do is hope that things change for you all. Alondra, do you think you can enact change? I mean, you obviously have reached out to be educated in this arena. I mean, did you know there was such a thing as the talk?
Well, no, I didn't. My skin is of lighter complexion and I do have green eyes, so I do have that privilege of not always being scared. But what I do at home is my parents sometimes don't really understand how their perspectives can also be a bit racist. When this did happen, the talk instead was it wasn't defending the killer. I forgot his name. I'm sorry, George Zimmerman. It was like it was a weird discussion because he was Latino or Hispanic. But it wasn't because of, oh, be careful when you go outside or this and that. But now, like, I make sure whenever I have talks with my parents, or they do kind of say something, I always have to like like remind them, like, check your privilege, because my mom is of light complexion but my dad isn't, so sometimes she says things and I'm like, no, no. Like she was saying how when she goes down she gets to like police, the police stop her, like sometimes I don't give her a ticket, and I had to tell her like, you are of lighter complexion, so you have to keep that in mind, because my dad was saying no, I do get the tickets. And so it's having those conversations with my parents and my family members as well, that understand that certain ways that they talk or their perspectives are also a bit racist. So it's interesting conversation having to have that. But I'm glad that at least I'm informed enough to be able to tell them, hey, this is not okay. And hopefully that can then change the perspective, because I know my cousins are younger and are more woke. So they also like call out their parents. So hopefully from then on people can now, at least in our communities, kind of check each other.
All right, well, this is not, this is a sensitive question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Could you raise your hand if you have been subject to racism in your own life personally? Alexis, how did that affect you?
Personally, I felt like I was a little bit unconscious to it at first. I feel like there were many like instances growing up where I experienced a lot of microaggressions and also overt racism. Where there was this one time in my high school where someone brought a Confederate flag to our school, and the administration didn't do anything about it. And those like small little traumas kind of build up, and you don't really recognize it until you're able to like sit down and like learn about the different mechanisms of race and how that contributes to it. So I really feel like I didn't have like a complete consciousness of what was going on until I like invested myself in the education of like African American studies and understanding like the truth about our history.
And Josh, have you been affected by racism?
I mean, there's just way too many incidents to count, actually. Um, just a lot of microaggressions, like Alexis said. And for the Confederate flag, I just think of, NASCAR recently banned it at its rallies. But that was just like in 2020. Like, why are we still having this conversation right there, right now? And like, I just think I was made aware of the color of my skin really at age 13, 14, when I stopped waving at police officers when they drive by. When I was a kid, I used to be like, oh, they're protecting me, like, hey, have them honk at me. But as I grew up and started to see what was happening and the injustice in the world, I just stopped and had to change the way I walk or change the way I'm perceived or the way I talk. And it's just very draining to constantly be aware of your race in America.
That's an interesting point. Constantly draining, something that people probably don't even fathom. You talked about, Kemery, you spoke about people putting their lives in danger in terms of this virus to go out and protest. I'm not sure that has actually been vocalized. Carrying the weight of racism is something that is, a physical manifestation, which is hard to imagine. It's just a profound and very complicated situation that desperately needs to change. But all of you and what you've chosen to learn about and what you've chosen to do and just even your choice of being here, do you feel as if you are progressively making things happen in a better way? Des, do you think just you have the power to change what's going on out there in a bigger world?
Definitely. Christian and I, as we mentioned earlier, are presidents of a Black male leadership organization at our university called Brothers of Consciousness. And we were able to lead the charge and really mobilize our student body to raise over $40,000 in support of different nonprofits that tackle various issues in support of Black people and the movement for Black lives and ending police brutality. So I think more than ever, seeing what we could do by launching an Instagram campaign and really just going out and telling our friends was definitely um, heartening and like great to see, especially during this time where tensions are high and just even being alone in quarantine can be on itself draining, let alone adding the racial component being draining. So I think this was like the first time where I felt like I could affect what's happening. We're able to talk to corporations now, and also even talk to these nonprofits to see how we as students can better support them, and how we can make sure our voices are heard in legislation, and also in support and solidarity of other people.
Margarita, do you feel like you can make a change?
Yeah, I do. I feel like the youth especially, and thanks to like social media, like we can really spread the word and help educate others. And like on TV, we see things that can be considered like propaganda for cops, but then social media, we're able to see like the whole picture, and that really shows us that if we really try to educate ourselves and really try to listen, we can do so much more than what people that are supposed to be doing are not doing.
You do have tools at your disposal that were not available before. Do you utilize those tools in a very strong way? Are all of you utilizing your ability to reach others immediately to affect any kind of change? I'll take a poll question. How many people are using the powers, the tools, all of the ways to talk? So how is it working for you, Camry?
It's working for me. I'm a part of a movement called ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, which is again pushes for reparations. And I have been able to talk about it a lot through social media and get others connected to it through that way. Um,
That's cool. Alondra, are you using it?
Yeah, so I'm trying to put it on my social media. Another thing I try to do is like people that I know in my community, just give them like information, especially what I learn, like programs available. I try to outreach to a few friends and people in here, just so that they feel empowered in different ways. I also try to communicate like whenever I have questions with the council member and stuff like that, and voice my concerns.
You're all educated. You're all pursuing education. Do you think that that's a critical component of making things better? Do you think education has played into your life in a very profound way? Or do you feel as if it's just enlightened you? I mean, how has education impacted who you are as a person? Let's ask Christian.
On that note, I just have to say, coming to university, especially at LMU, it's been enlightening because I come from a predominantly white area. I'm from Santa Clarita, and it's one of the ruby red parts of California. So, the question you asked earlier about, have you ever experienced racism before? Well, that's all over this county right here. So, I think going to LMU and being able to have the chance to learn about, African American studies, stuff like that, being able to be immersed in different cultures. There's a lot to be said for that, and I think we have to make a stronger push in this country to allow for people who wouldn't normally be able to have those conversations or experiences with people that don't look like them or don't have the same experience as them. You need to make sure that's at the forefront, because a lot of people who have never had to, think about or embrace a lot of the issues that affect Black people in this country or other people of color. And I think if we start there and start educating, what the historical context of why we're in this moment, where we are now, there's a lot to be said for the changes that can make.
Right. I think that whole idea of we all need an education. I mean, whether we're actually in a university setting or whether as students, I think we all need an education because I think there's far too much that has not been brought into the light of day. Did any of you participate in any of the protests or any of the rallies or anything like that? Yeah. What was that experience like for you, Josh? How did that feel?
It was both empowering, but also really scary at the same time. Like, we're over here protesting police brutality, but then you have police officers standing right across from you, whole vans filled, we're over here peacefully protesting, but you see they're armed. And so it's scary in that sense. But to your point about education, even education can let you know your rights. My parents were like, "Oh, don't go in the streets. That's illegal. You can't do that." But you can, and that's our first. That's our right to peacefully protest. And as long as we're not being violent like that, but not everybody's educated in that sense or knowing what the police can and can't do. But I found it very empowering to see what everyone can do, because it's just one person going to a protest and another person, but everyone together actually makes change. And I was outside of Pasadena City Hall just this weekend, protesting, advocating for change, and trying to make it happen.
Yeah. And I saw someone else had gone out. Who else had gone out? Alexis, how was it for you?
It was amazing. I went to the one on Sunday that was in Hollywood, and it was just so beautiful to see like everybody coming together for a common goal. But based on what Josh was saying, and based on how the media has portrayed these protests, it's kind of like very scary because the police are reacting with the same exact violence that they've perpetuated towards us. So it's kind of like they're feeding into this narrative of continuous violence, and that's just extremely unsettling for me to watch. But then, based on the point of educational equity, I feel like that educational equity is extremely important because it allows you to understand the historical truths of our American history. And you don't get this like whitewashed or watered down history of, well, the Native Americans peacefully gave up their land. And it's it's a conversation that we need to have in order to understand our present situation.
You realize you are all now part of history. Has that sunk in any way, shape, or form? I mean, there's, as I said earlier, as I introduced the show, there's a seismic shift happening now. I mean, obviously we have a global pandemic. Now we have worldwide protests against social injustice and racism. Do you realize that you are now living in history that people will look back on, and who knows how this will all play out? But are you conscious of the fact that you are playing a part in this? Yeah? How about you, Christian? Are you aware of it? Or do you think of the now and not of the later?
I'm thinking of the now and the later. I think we had this discussion, just literally doesn't have this discussion yesterday and the night before that with a faculty member at LMU. And the discussion was really about, students historically have been the one to, spark change around the world, not just in this country, but around the world. So there's a lot that, students are doing around the country, not just here in Los Angeles, that's making a lot of change, a whole world of difference. There's also a lot of stuff that we're fighting for as a student body at LMU to fight for those kids that are coming 10, 15, 20 years after us. So yeah, I think it's sunken in, every day you go on social media, you're seeing protests from here to Belgium, London, Japan. It's insane what this has sparked, but hopefully we can use this momentum. We've had progress in the past, but not just to the point where it needs to be. Hopefully we'll just not take our foot off the gas until we finally see the equality that needs to be finally found in this country.
Alondra, what do you think? Are you aware of of how much impact this particular moment in time has?
Yeah, at first I didn't really it's kind of hard to understand like what's going on, just because of like the pandemic and then all of this, but it has, and I hope people can like later on like ask like, oh, what did you do in 2020, and keep people accountable because of what's happening. This is like the Black Lives Matter is not, what is it, it's not a political issue, it's a human rights issue. And so the fact that people are like trying to have like have a hard time having that conversation, it's really like opening the eyes of like what people are really thinking, and it's just interesting seeing how people try to defend their point of views when they're trying to say that it's not. So it's going to be very interesting. It's going to open up a lot of conversations in the future, and hopefully people can look back and say let's do better. Hopefully also now, but
so what do you all really want the world to hear? I mean, if you actually had a platform in which the entire planet would give you the stage for a couple minutes, what's the most, and make it a little bit brief because we're sort of running out of time, but what do you want the world to hear? What do you want the world to hear, Josh?
I would say for these people who want to sit on the sidelines and say, it's not my problem, just think what would have happened if that was your brother, that was your dad, your friend. And we need to come together as people to solve this problem. As Alondra said, this is a human rights issue. So don't be afraid to enact change. And the only thing we have to lose are our chains.
Des?
I mean, just to echo that, that you are society. We can't keep blaming our problems on institutions that weren't built for us. So we definitely have to be able to enact actionable change, and change that lasts for the future. So do what you can, and do what you like, and do it in a way that helps other people. So, which is really an Ignatian way of saying just do good, and be ready to get off the sidelines, and really pave the way for a brighter tomorrow.
I think I would tell everyone to listen to Black voices and to educate themselves, and just remember that you want to be in the right side of history, and that you really have the power to change and not just keep the same problem over and over.
Camry?
Mine is very simple. Now more than ever should we see how important government is, and the problems and the solutions that we need only government can fix and solve for us, Black Americans.
Kind of echoing on to what Kareem said, systemic racism is still alive and it's really strong. It's never stopped. Racism has never stopped, and it's present in how everything's run, from housing to school to food, everything. And so hopefully people also change their perspectives, and if they do have biases, see where it's coming from and be more informed.
Alexis?
I completely agree with what everybody else was saying. I think it comes with us having the power to both empathize and humanize other people's situation. I know from personal experience, I've exposed myself to different social realities of understanding and listening to other people's stories. And with that, I've become so aware of their experiences and what they've gone through. And I think it's easier for us to like empathize with people if we're able to put a face to a name, a face to a situation. So I think we all have the power to enact change, and we all can be agents of enacting that change, but it comes with us being able to understand how racism is so embedded within this country. And if we don't acknowledge that, and we don't acknowledge that we all play into this, then we won't be able to change anything.
And I guess Christian?
I think I'd have to echo the point that Des made just a second earlier about you are society. And also tying it back to a historical quote, Martin Luther King Jr. once said he was more concerned about the white moderate in this country being the biggest obstacle to improvement than the Ku Klux Klan. And I think in today's context, it's not just the white moderate, it's the moderate in general, the person not doing or taking any action. Because this isn't just about police brutality, there's systemic racism all throughout the criminal justice system in the country in general that comes through incarceration rates, sentencing, gerrymandering at that for voting. So I would just say, please do not lose focus. Do not take your foot off the gas. Do not be confused or distracted when we have these little surface level gives. Like for example, Mayor Garcetti taking only $150 million away from the funding from the police department when they still get an increase in total funding from last year. That's not enough to go back and help the communities in our city to help rebuild. Nowhere near enough that's needed. So don't get distracted. Don't get lost, don't lose focus, and keep fighting until we can be proud to be in a country that treats all of us members and citizens equally.
I can't thank all of you enough. This has been enlightening, moving, and extremely thought-provoking. You might be pessimistic, but when I see all of you and I hear all of you, I'm actually very optimistic. So anyway, thank you both. Thank you all for being with us today, and hopefully we'll see you again on another one of these great conversations.